Hello, it's Jackie Clark on behalf of Flying Unicorn, and today I'm bringing you a What Can You Do Wednesday tutorial on creating worry-free misted backgrounds. I've always loved the look of media-heavy mixed media backgrounds, but I was hesitant to jump into mixed media because I was worried about ruining a project I'd spent hours working on with some wayward misting or the wrong color choice. By studying the projects of artists I admired, I came up with a tutorial I'm sharing with you today, the secret I believe to how they create their amazing backgrounds, and the way I've been able to let loose with misting and painting without worrying I would spoil my project. I hope that you'll come away from this tutorial excited to experiment with mixed media, and I would love to see your projects posted in the Flying Unicorn Gallery. Everyone who uses mists has been the victim of wayward misting. Either it's handler error and you've pointed the nozzle the wrong way, like at your computer keyboard, or your sprayer is partially clogged, giving you any number of spray patterns that make you want to hang your head and cry. There's the bottle that splutters and stops, so you have to change color mid-project, the sprayer that sprays an interesting new pattern. Look at that starburst. The sprayer that splatters instead of misting, and then maybe changes its mind midway through and decides to produce crescents. Aren't those lovely? And then there's the dreaded mist ring. One thing that determines how big a catastrophe these mistakes, get it, are is the type of paper you're using. Some papers have a bit of a coating to them, giving you a little extra wet time to blot up the mist, while others, like the sumptuous Studio 75 paper we carry in the store, which is heavy, stands up fantastic to media, and is great for distressing, also sucks in mist like a hoover. No sooner has the mist landed on the paper than it is being drunk up, and you can see that even though I blot it pretty quickly, there is no missing the big brown spot left behind. Here you can see exactly how little wet time you have when working with these thirsty papers. I spray, pick up the paper, and the mist is already gone. Because the mist does not seep through to the other side of this particular paper, I can flip it over and show you how a simple coating of gesso on your paper will cure most of your misting woes. I'm applying the gesso in a fairly thin layer. Gesso's original function is as an artist primer. It allows your paints and mists to sit on top of your canvas or paper rather than sinking in. This gives you a longer wet time and also provides a more forgiving surface. I use my fingers to smooth out any lines left by the card before drying it. Once it's dry, you can see that the pattern of the paper is still clearly visible, although slightly whitewashed. Now when I go in with my mist, you can see it bead on the surface of the paper rather than sinking in. The color may be slightly lighter than if you didn't use the gesso, but I have a cure for that as well if it bothers you. If you were happy with your misting, you could heat set it now and be done with it. But what if you weren't? Don't worry about it. The gesso is like a magic eraser. Here I'm using a dry paper towel, and as you can see it does a pretty good job of getting most of the color out. But if I add a little water or use a wet wipe, the mist is almost completely gone. When I add some water to the project, you can see it bead up on top of the gesso. This will allow my mists to move around on the page rather than sinking in. This is perfect if you're going in with watercolor paints and want to be able to manipulate the paint, and with mist to create gorgeous drips. This technique also allows you to get areas of darker and lighter mist deposit, which you do not get when you mist direct to paper. What you may notice when using your mist this way is that they appear lighter. This is because you are diluting the mist and using the same amount to cover a greater area. If you want a darker area, add more mist, or if you want the color concentrated near the top of your project, heat set your drips and then add more color. Here I have a piece of Prima paper. I've treated part of the paper with gesso so that I can show you the difference that gesso makes over an area of the paper that does not have any gesso on it. Prima paper does have a bit of a coating which makes it a little bit more forgiving to gesso. However, you're going to see some differences that the gesso makes. On the left-hand side here, I've applied some clear gesso. I told you earlier that if you didn't like the whitewashed effect, I had a solution. The clear gesso is it. As you can see, there's very little difference between the clear gessoed strip and the paper itself. Gesso has quite a texture to it, almost like a sandpaper, whereas the paper itself is smooth. Where this becomes a problem is if you want to use your felt-tipped markers to do your journaling. The gesso will grind down the felt-tipped markers to the point where you have to throw them away. If you want to use a brush tipped marker like a Copic marker, or watercolor pencils or other pencil crayons for your journaling, you're going to be okay, but stay away from your felt tipped markers. So I'm going to start by misting 3 equal areas of mist on my sections of the page. And you can see that the middle section, there is some beading. It does have a bit of resist built right into the paper, but when I apply water, there's going to be a lot of difference between the 3 areas. Even now you can see that the 2 areas with gesso, we're getting some drips, whereas there isn't a lot happening with the center section. Now when I go in with my water, the mist on the gessoed sections is really going to move around. I can even move it from where it is to other places of the project, and we get those beautiful, beautiful drips. But if I decided I didn't like that drip, I can just go in with a dry paper towel and blot it off, and it's as if it was never there at all. The middle part, however, is pretty much dry, and so we aren't getting any mist up. If you can see, the paper towel comes away clean, whereas my other 2 sections, it comes away with mist on it because it's still wet. I've applied strips of paper to the bottom of the page with glue, and as you can see, the parts that have been gessoed are cemented down to the page, whereas the parts without gesso, the paper will still curl and distort when I add mists to it. So that's another added advantage of using the gesso. I'm going to go in now with a dark colored mist so that you can see that the advantages of gessoing your background aren't limited to using a light color of mist. Here you can see on the gessoed areas, the mist really is sitting on top. You can tell the difference. We're getting drips from the 2 gessoed sections, whereas the center section, there's not a lot of movement in the mist. And if I decide that I don't like where the mist is gone, I can go back in with my paper towel and rub off the mist from the gessoed areas. But as you can see, it did not come away from the center area that has not been treated. I can also go in and blot away the color on top of the layers. As you can see, you get some color off the layers in the middle, but not a lot. Whereas the areas with gesso, I can wipe away quite a bit of color and just leave the definition around my layers if I choose. When I add water, again we get more movement of the mist in the gessoed areas, and the center area, everything has already been absorbed, and so we're not getting a whole lot of movement. So there you have what a difference the gesso makes on your paper layers as well, and you could then go in and add subsequent layers of mist in different colors and build up a really nice textured background. One other place where gesso is very useful is on chipboard. If you have a naked piece of chipboard and you mist it, especially with a 2-toned mist like a Lindy Stamp Gang mist, what you're going to find is that the dye ink seeps into the thirsty little chipboard piece and just the sparkle stays on top. So you get a very monotone piece of chipboard. Whereas this one I've painted with clear gesso and with white gesso, and you get a lot more depth of color, and you can really see that dye ink pop and the 2-tone show through. Thank you for joining me for What Can You Do Wednesday today. I hope you learned something new, and I look forward to seeing your mixed media masterpieces over at the Flying Unicorn. Remember that we have a new What Can You Do Wednesday tutorial every Wednesday, and they are always available on the Flying Unicorn YouTube channel.